Imagine devoting your entire life to raising a daughter, only to have her look you in the eye and tell you to find somewhere else to die. Imagine being stripped of your home, your dignity, and your future all in the span of a single afternoon while the people you trusted most celebrated their victory. But what if the story didn't end there? What if the pawn you underestimated became the queen that toppled your entire game? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's about a grieving widow who lost everything, only to discover that she had been holding the real power all along. And when the truth surfaced, it shattered her daughter's world in ways no one could have predicted. Stay with me, because the twists you are about to hear will leave you speechless. Subscribe now to Silent Lies. You won't want to miss what comes next. The day my daughter told me to find somewhere else to die, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Her words cut through me sharper than any knife. After 43 years of marriage, after raising her through sickness, tantrums, heartbreaks, and triumphs, I stood in my own living room like an intruder, being told I no longer belonged. My husband Robert had passed only weeks earlier, and grief still clung to me like damp clothing. Yet there I was, being ordered to pack my life into 2 suitcases as if I were some transient guest overstaying her welcome. Victoria, my only child, stood by the doorway with her husband Kevin. She had come armed with paperwork and the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power. Her mask of concern slipped quickly, revealing a cold calculation that had likely been simmering for years. She spoke of Dad's will, of inheritances and legacies, of numbers and assets, as though love could be reduced to percentages. I could barely comprehend what she was saying until the final blow landed. According to her, Robert had left everything to her: the house, the investments, the fortune. And she, in her boundless kindness, had allowed me to stay for a while. That kindness, she announced, had expired. Find somewhere else to die, she said flatly. Her eyes did not waver. My daughter, my flesh and blood, spoke as though I were a burden that had outlived its usefulness. I packed in silence. 2 suitcases for 43 years of memories, plus a box of photographs that I could not bear to abandon. Robert's ties still hung neatly in our closet. His favorite chair still faced the fireplace, indentation shaped by decades of use. All of it remained, but none of it was mine anymore.
What happened?
My daughter claimed it with a cruel certainty, as though love and loyalty had never bound us. Kevin carried my belongings to the trunk of their car, treating my life as though it were clutter to be removed before new owners moved in. He avoided my eyes, mumbling platitudes about independence and fresh starts. Independence. As if being abandoned in a cheap motel could be called freedom.
I am very sorry.
Victoria handed me $200 in cash as though tipping a maid after service. Her voice carried the same false sweetness she had perfected as a child to get out of trouble.
I can't believe this!
Should cover you until you get settled, she said, already checking her phone for messages more important than my existence. The sunset inn greeted me with mildew and a bedspread that smelled of decades of sorrow. The neon sign outside flickered with the kind of resignation I felt in my bones. As I sat on the sagging mattress, the enormity of what had happened pressed down on me. In the span of hours, I had gone from wife and mother to widow and exile. The daughter I raised with every ounce of my strength had reduced me to nothing. But grief and humiliation gave way to suspicion. Robert had been many things: stubborn, traditional, sometimes dismissive of my knowledge about money, but never cruel. He had shown me his will years before. He explained it carefully, making sure I understood his intentions. I was certain that what Victoria claimed did not match his words. Robert had loved me too deeply to abandon me in death. The next morning I rose before dawn, unable to sleep in the hollow silence of the motel. With trembling hands I searched the motel's weak Wi-Fi for Robert's attorney, the man who had guided us through property purchases and countless documents. His name, Harrison Fitzgerald, glowed on my phone screen like a beacon of hope. My heart pounded as I boarded a bus, clutching my last few bills. The law office was pristine, its leather chairs and oak shelves a sharp contrast to my crumpled clothes and exhausted face. When Harrison entered, his surprise was genuine. "Margaret," he said, his voice laced with warmth. "I wondered when you'd come in. I called the house many times, but Victoria told me you were traveling." Traveling. That was the story my daughter had given him. She had not even considered that her lies would unravel. I explained through tight lips what Victoria had told me, that I inherited nothing. Harrison's face darkened with alarm. He retrieved a thick file from his cabinet, his hands moving with urgency. Inside lay Robert's real will, signed, witnessed, and notarized. My eyes filled as Harrison read the words aloud. The house, Robert's beloved sanctuary, was mine, 70% of all financial assets, roughly $23 million, also mine. To Victoria, $10 million in trust. But only if she treated me with dignity and respect. Robert had seen her greed before I did. He had crafted protection from beyond the grave. The truth settled over me like fire in my chest. My daughter had lied, stolen, and humiliated me, all while standing on a throne she believed unshakable. But the throne had been built on deception. As Harrison explained the legal ramifications, my hands stopped trembling. Rage steadied me. Victoria's cruelty had backfired. Her inheritance, the fortune she thought she claimed, was slipping from her grasp because of her own arrogance. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt power. Leaving Harrison's office, I knew the war had only begun. Victoria thought she had buried me, but she had no idea that pawns, when pushed far enough, can become queens. And I was ready to make my move. The weight of truth was heavier than grief, but it was a weight I welcomed. As I stepped out of Harrison's office into the sharp sunlight, I felt like a woman pulled from drowning, only to realize she had been standing in shallow water the entire time. For days I had believed myself destitute, cast aside, dependent on the grudging pity of a daughter who treated me like a discarded relic. But Robert's real will told a different story. The house was mine. The majority of his assets were mine. And Victoria's share, the $10 million she so greedily boasted about, was shackled to a condition she had already shattered with her cruelty. Harrison leaned across his desk before I left, his voice calm but edged with anger. Margaret, what your daughter has done is not only betrayal, it is fraud, elder abuse, and a crime punishable by law. You must understand this is no misunderstanding. I did understand. The trembling widow who had wept in a motel room was gone. In her place stood a woman who realized her husband had loved her enough to foresee betrayal and had armed her with the means to fight back. That afternoon, Harrison called in favors. His secretary dialed the police. Banks were notified. A private investigator joined us in what Harrison half-jokingly called Operation Justice. I sat in his leather chair watching strangers move with precision on my behalf, each phone call a nail in the coffin of Victoria's schemes. The forged documents she had shown me would be examined. Every bank account she thought she controlled was frozen. The utilities she had smugly transferred into her name were suspended. The very foundations of her new life were collapsing, brick by brick, before she even realized it. At precisely 3:47, my phone rang. Victoria's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity outweighed caution. I answered, and her voice, usually smooth and confident, was sharp with panic. Mom, where are you? There's some mix-up. The banks are saying Dad's assets are frozen. My cards aren't working. The power company says they need proof of ownership. What is going on? I let silence stretch between us before answering. Hello, Victoria. I'm sitting in Mr. Fitzgerald's office. Do you remember him? Your father's attorney. The one who read the real will. Her gasp was audible, a sound more primal than polished. Mom, I do not know what you think you discovered, but this is not what it looks like. I was only trying to protect you from the complexity of investments, from responsibilities you cannot handle. Her lies flowed easily, as though her tongue had rehearsed them for years. But her voice trembled at the edges, and I could taste her fear like metal on my tongue. Victoria, I said slowly, you forged legal documents. You committed fraud. You forced me from my home. You handed me $200 like I was a beggar. And now, because of a clause your father wisely included, the $10 million you thought you had inherited is mine. Every dollar, every last cent, your arrogance cost you everything. There was no immediate reply. Then a desperate whisper, that is impossible. Detective Rodriguez is sitting here with us if you want to discuss impossibility with her. She finds your actions very clear. The silence that followed was longer this time, punctuated only by her uneven breathing. I could almost hear her mind racing, clawing for some angle of escape. Finally, she asked, can we meet? Please, Mom, let us talk. We can work something out. My voice was cold steel. We will meet, Victoria, at the courthouse. And I ended the call. Within hours, her perfect little empire crumbled in plain sight. Her credit cards declined as she attempted to make purchases. The utilities she had switched into her name went dark. Kevin's smug smile faltered when his company's financial accounts were subpoenaed. Every step they had taken to bury me now became evidence against them. That evening, Detective Rodriguez briefed me with a grim satisfaction. Your daughter and her husband are clever, but not clever enough.
So the main purpose
The
is to
forged
prevent
will is
elder abuse and
sophisticated,
financial
yes,
exploitation.
but it is still forgery. And the trust
The one
clause
thing I want
makes
us to
this
do is
airtight.
brainstorm.
They will be facing
totally agree.
charges
Just
sooner
to
than they
clarify, we need to have
expect.
a clear agenda
Later
for
that
the next
night,
meeting.
I lay in a motel bed that no longer felt like a prison. Tomorrow I would move back into my home, not as Robert's
Well, I've had
shadow,
a
but
really
as the
interesting
rightful
career,
owner.
and I'm very
I
grateful
imagined
for it.
Victoria storming through my kitchen in confusion as her credit cards
Betrayal
failed.
does not break
Kevin
you.
fuming as his business records
It
were
remakes
scrutinized. They had thought me powerless, a pawn to be swept
We
from the
must work
board.
together to ensure
They were wrong.
transparency and
By the
accountability.
next evening, justice moved swiftly. Victoria was arrested at a restaurant, still wearing the arrogance she thought money had secured for her. Kevin followed the next morning, dragged from his office where his forged documents were already unraveling his career.
What does
For the
revenge mean
first
to you?
time in weeks,
Revenge
I
means
slept in my
that
own
you
bed.
are getting
The
back at a
house felt
person for
different,
something that they did to
not
you.
haunted by Robert's absence, but alive with the possibility of my independence. I wandered from room to room, seeing the walls not as monuments to his choices, but as canvases for mine. Every photograph I rehung was a declaration. I belong here. As dawn filtered through the curtains, I poured myself a cup of coffee at the kitchen counter I had polished for decades. My reflection in the glass door was not the woman Victoria had dismissed. It was someone reborn, sharpened by betrayal, steadied by truth.
do not owe you
I had been
reconciliation.
underestimated for too long. My husband had believed in my strength, even when I did not.
we are going to move
And my
this
daughter's
application to the
cruelty
next
had given
round.
me the
Yeah.
final push to
Sounds
claim
good.
it. The war was not over. There were more battles ahead.
Then I remember.
But one thing was certain. Margaret Sullivan, the invisible wife and discarded mother, was gone. In her place stood the woman Robert knew I could be, the woman Victoria never imagined I would become. And I was just getting started. The day I returned to my house did not feel like a homecoming.
And so
It
with
felt
that, we're
like
very happy to
reclaiming
announce that the
territory
foundation will be
stolen under the
funding your
cover of
entire program.
lies. The key slid into the lock as it had thousands of
Thank
times
you, Margaret.
before, but this time the air inside was different. Victoria's perfume lingered in the hallway, the cloying sweetness of a woman who believed she had already won. Her designer dresses cluttered the master bedroom closet, hanging like arrogant trophies. Robert's careful organization was gone, replaced with the chaos of someone who thought possession equaled victory. I did not weep as I stepped into the bedroom. Instead, I methodically packed her expensive clothes into garbage bags. Each dress
We have a
stuffed
plan,
inside was
and I'm
another
confident
reminder
it
that
will
she had
work.
tried to erase me. By the time I
believe
finished,
you.
the closet looked bare again,
This house
stripped
is
of her
mine.
invasion.
Finally,
I left the bags on the porch like trash, because that is how she had treated me when she ordered me out of my own home. That night I slept in the bed Robert and I had shared for decades. The sheets were different, replaced with Victoria's silk, but the frame, the wood, the room itself still belonged to me. Lying there, I felt the house breathe differently. For years I had lived here as Robert's wife, as Victoria's mother, as the silent keeper of a family's memories. But now I was here as
Robert,
myself. In the
I
morning,
survived.
Harrison called with updates that tasted sweeter than coffee. "Margaret," he said, "Victoria's bail has been set at $50,000. Since all her accounts are frozen, she has no means to cover it. Kevin's bail is $200,000. The judge does not look kindly
Tonight,
on
we
his
delve into
history
a
of
profound
financial
story,
dealings.
unveiling
It is
truths that
unlikely
redefine
either will
our
be free
understanding.
soon." I nearly laughed, a sound rusty with disuse. The couple who had thrown me out with $200 in hand now found themselves begging for help from a system that had seen through their lies. Justice was not abstract anymore. It was tangible, something I
was
could
just thinking
feel in
about
every corner of my
childhood
house.
in Brooklyn.
But justice had a way of reaching further than expected. Reporters began calling. A woman from Channel 7 News wanted to interview me about elder abuse,
And I know that
about
together we can
fraud
achieve
within
something
families.
truly
"Your
extraordinary.
story could help others,"
Her
she
journey,
insisted.
her resilience
I told her I
will
was not
inspire
ready,
millions.
but her words stayed with me long after the call ended. How many women like me were sitting in motels tonight, betrayed by the very children they had raised? My humiliation could become their warning, even as I considered it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Victoria, calling from jail. Her voice was brittle, stripped of its usual composure. "Mom," she whispered, "please, you have to help me. This is a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. Think of the children. Think of the family." The audacity was breathtaking. She had cast me aside like waste. And now she begged for mercy, using her children as bargaining chips. I remembered her words, "find somewhere else to die," and my resolve hardened. "Victoria," I said quietly, "you did this to yourself, and now you will face the consequences." She sobbed on the other end, but I hung up. For years I had allowed her tears to manipulate me. Not anymore. Later that week, Kevin's
foundation
voice
means a lot
invaded
to
my
me,
phone.
and I am so
He
grateful
cloaked
for
his
all of your hard
desperation
work.
in charm, trying to appeal to reason.
So this will
Margaret,
allow for
surely we
expansion
can
on the
resolve
east
this
and west
privately.
side.
Involving the police is excessive. Victoria was overwhelmed. She was only trying to manage things for you. I asked the question that silenced him. Kevin, did you help
This
forge
is where
those
we will
documents?
achieve our vision.
His pause was all the answer I needed. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful. She was under pressure. She thought she was protecting you. Protecting me, I repeated, letting the words drip with venom. By throwing me out of my own home? By handing me
underestimated
cash
me.
as though I were a beggar? By convincing a lawyer that I was traveling so I would not attend the reading of my own husband's will? He faltered, his smooth banker's confidence finally cracking. Margaret, please, be reasonable. I closed my eyes and remembered decades of reason. Reason had kept me silent while Robert made decisions without me. Reason had allowed Victoria to dismiss my opinions at every dinner table. Reason had kept me invisible. But reason had no place anymore. I was reasonable for 43 years, I said. It did not work well for me. Now it is time for you to be reasonable in prison. The call ended with his silence. That evening, as I walked through the kitchen, I realized the house no longer felt haunted. For so long it had been Robert's domain, built around his preferences, his furniture, his vision. I had been the caretaker, never the creator. Now it was mine, not just in law but in spirit. I traced my hand along the countertops, imagining them replaced, redesigned, reflecting me for the first time. I opened the curtains wider, letting the evening light pour in, unapologetic and bold. Detective Rodriguez visited a few days later with news that Victoria had been formally charged. Her crimes were listed clearly: elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy. Kevin's charges were heavier, weighed down by his financial history. They will fight, of course, the detective said. They always do. But the evidence is overwhelming. Their arrogance was their undoing. I nodded, not with joy, but with a steady sense of inevitability. The wheel had turned, and this was simply the result of their choices. That night, I opened a bottle of wine Kevin had once gifted Robert, a vintage meant to flaunt his wealth. I poured a glass and sat in the living room, surrounded by silence. But this silence was not oppressive. It was the silence of ownership, of survival, of victory. For the first time since Robert's death, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Not as a widow defined by absence, not as a mother erased by betrayal, but as a woman who had endured and emerged stronger. The thought was intoxicating. Victoria believed she had ended me. Instead, she had ignited the beginning of who I was always meant to become. The knock on my door came early in the morning, sharp and deliberate. Through the glass, I saw a woman who looked as though she had stepped out of a magazine spread. Perfectly coiffed hair, diamonds glittering on her fingers, and the kind of practiced smile that belonged to someone who had never been denied anything in her life. Eleanor Hayes, Kevin's mother, had arrived. I let her in out of curiosity, not hospitality. She settled into my living room like royalty accepting an audience, crossing her legs with the elegance of a woman who had always believed the world owed her respect. Margaret, she said smoothly, we need to discuss this situation rationally. Her voice carried the same condescension I had heard from Victoria for years. Perhaps I should not have been surprised. Entitlement, it seemed, was a family heirloom. She began her performance, downplaying Kevin's crimes as poor choices and Victoria's betrayal as regrettable mistakes. Her words were carefully chosen, designed to sound compassionate but threaded with arrogance. Prosecuting them as vindictive, she insisted. What good does it do to destroy families over money? I could not help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. Money? I asked. Your son forged documents, conspired with my daughter, and threw me out of my own home. That is not about money. That is about greed, cruelty, and crime. Unfazed, Eleanor leaned forward, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret.
Margaret.
Kevin's family is prepared to compensate you, $2 million, in exchange for dropping the charges against him. The sheer audacity made my skin prickle. $2 million? To forgive the theft of $33 million? To forgive being cast out like garbage? She raised the offer without hesitation, her tone still dripping with entitlement. $5 million. Final. Think of it as a settlement. Everyone walks away. No messy trials, no publicity. I studied her carefully. She expected me to be dazzled, to fold under the weight of a figure that sounded generous to those who had known scarcity. But she underestimated me. I had been poor before. I had raised a child while scraping together money for college, worked part-time jobs when Robert's business wavered, and learned how to stretch every dollar. Wealth did not impress me, and pity disguised as bribery insulted me. No, I said firmly. Your son will face the law and my daughter with him. Her polished facade cracked for the first time. Her eyes narrowed and her voice hardened. Margaret, you should know that Kevin's legal team has discovered some interesting details about Robert's business practices. It would be unfortunate if those became public during a trial. The threat hung heavy between us. I kept my expression steady, though my heart pounded. What kind of details? The kind, she said with a satisfied smile, that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this family was. When she left, the house felt colder. I called Harrison immediately, repeating her words. He was silent for a long moment before finally saying, Margaret, whatever they think they found does not erase Victoria and Kevin's crimes. But it could muddy the waters. If they can drag Robert's reputation into question, it may influence a jury. The idea unsettled me more than I expected. For 43 years I had trusted Robert, believed in his integrity. He was traditional, stubborn, sometimes dismissive. Yes, but honest. Yet now I was faced with the possibility that my husband had harbored secrets darker than I imagined. That evening I sat in Robert's study, which had always felt like his sanctuary, and began to go through his files. The drawers were meticulously organized, every document dated, every folder labeled. At first everything looked ordinary, but deeper in the files I found inconsistencies, payments to shell companies with no discernible purpose, consulting contracts with firms that existed only on paper, numbers that whispered of something hidden, something wrong. The realization struck me like a physical blow. Robert, the man who had held my hand through grief, the man who had built a home with me, had been living a double life. Harrison recommended a private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Chen. She spent hours in that study, scanning and photographing documents with a quiet efficiency that made me uneasy. Finally, she looked at me with the solemnity of someone delivering a diagnosis. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband was laundering money, millions over the course of more than a decade. He was running funds for organized crime through his consulting firm. I shook my head in disbelief. That is impossible. Robert was meticulous. He hated dishonesty. Carol slid the documents toward me. The evidence is overwhelming. The money trails are clear. Shell companies, false invoices, fabricated services. He was in deep. And the 10 million left to Victoria came directly from those funds. If the FBI uncovers this, they will seize everything. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. The fortune Robert had left me, the house I had just reclaimed, all of it now threatened. Worse, the Hayes family might already know. Eleanor's smug confidence, Kevin's arrogant side all made sense. They were not bluffing. They had leverage. What are my options? I whispered. Carol hesitated. You can go to the FBI yourself, confess what you have discovered, and hope for leniency. You might keep the house. Or you can remain silent. But if Kevin's team reveals this first, you could face charges for unknowingly benefiting from criminal proceeds. I felt sick, betrayed by the memory of the man I had loved for most of my life. Robert's secrets had become the weapon my enemies could use to destroy me. As I sat alone in that study, the weight of betrayal pressed down from every direction. My daughter had abandoned me. My son-in-law had conspired against me. And now the man I thought I knew best might have left me a legacy tainted with blood money. But even in the pit of despair, a spark of defiance remained.
Give me that back.
I had been underestimated before. I had been discarded, manipulated, threatened. And each time I had risen. If Robert had left me a poisoned inheritance, I would not allow Victoria and Kevin to twist it into their salvation. If they wanted to play with fire, I would make sure they burned. The study felt less like Robert's sanctuary now, and more like a battlefield. The desk where he had signed contracts became a place where I swore an oath to myself.
Robert was an informant.
Whatever came next, I would not cower. They thought betrayal had broken me. But betrayal had built me into something stronger. The truth about Robert's business had left me unsteady, as though the ground itself had betrayed me. Yet betrayal had become familiar, and I had learned to wield it as fuel. When Carol Chen explained the depth of Robert's money laundering, I thought the weight of it would crush me. But her warning was clear. If I did not act first, Victoria and Kevin would use his crimes as their bargaining chip. It was almost poetic. The daughter who had forged my exile now planned to resurrect her fortunes by weaponizing her father's sins. She called me the same evening Carol left, her voice lowered, stripped of arrogance but not of manipulation. "Mom," she said, "we need to meet tonight. There are things about Daddy you need to know." "I already know," I replied. The silence on her end told me I had pierced her advantage. "I know about the laundering. I know the money is tainted. I know everything. Her tone shifted quickly, desperation tangled with calculation. Then you know what this means. Kevin's lawyers are in contact with the FBI. They are willing to make a deal. You can keep the house and $5 million clean. The rest goes to the government. The fraud charges disappear. We all walk away. It was brilliant in its cruelty. They had turned Robert's shadow into a weapon, attempting to trade their crimes for my compliance. For a moment, I nearly faltered, imagining myself stripped of everything again, left with only ashes and shame. But then I remembered the motel room, the $200 pressed into my hand, and the words that had shattered me. Find somewhere else to die. No, I said firmly. I will decide how this ends, not you. After the call, I dialed Carol. How quickly can you arrange a meeting with the FBI? The next morning, in Harrison's conference room, I faced Agent Sarah Martinez. She was everything I expected a federal agent to be. Calm, sharp-eyed, immune to charm. She listened as I laid out everything: Robert's hidden dealings, Victoria's forged documents, Kevin's manipulations, Eleanor's threats. When I finished, her expression was unreadable. Mrs. Sullivan, she said finally, you understand that by coming forward, you admit to benefiting from criminal proceeds. I understand, I said, but I will not allow my daughter and her husband to twist this into their victory. I would rather stand in the truth than hide in their lies. She studied me for a long moment, then allowed the smallest smile. Would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I sat in my living room, a recording device strapped beneath my blouse. My heart pounded in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. At 8 o'clock sharp, Victoria and Kevin arrived, dressed as though for a business dinner. Kevin carried a briefcase, his expression confident, while Victoria's smile was polished, her eyes glinting with the hope of control. Mom, you look wonderful, she said, kissing my cheek as though we were meeting for brunch. You seem calmer. Clarity does that, I replied. Kevin opened the briefcase, sliding papers across the table with the ease of a man who had negotiated countless deals. We have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, complete immunity. Everyone wins. I leaned back, letting their words spill into the microphone hidden on me. Clean assets. That is an interesting phrase. What about the $33 million Robert left me? Victoria's mask slipped for a moment. That money is contaminated. You cannot keep it. Taking $5 million is the best outcome possible. And you? I asked. What do you gain? Kevin's confidence sharpened. We move forward with reputations intact. Victoria's charges vanish. My firm continues untouched. Your grandchildren have stability. You keep dignity. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was still calling felony fraud a misunderstanding. I let my gaze settle on him. Kevin, when did you learn about Robert's criminal dealings? Was it before you married Victoria, or only when you were planning to steal from me? His composure flickered. That is irrelevant. Actually, it is very relevant, I pressed. Because if you knew, you were complicit for years. And if you discovered it while committing your own crimes, you are not just guilty, you are careless. Victoria's voice broke in, sharp and defensive. Mom, what are you saying? I am saying you underestimated me. At that cue, Agent Martinez entered with 2 other federal agents. The air shifted instantly. Kevin froze, his hand halfway to the briefcase. Victoria's face drained of color. Victoria Sullivan Hayes and Kevin Hayes, Agent Martinez said, her voice crisp. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. The shock on their faces was almost enough to break my resolve, but not quite. Mom, how could you? Victoria cried as agents fastened cuffs around her wrists. The same way you could throw me out of my own home, I said coldly. Except my way is legal. Kevin tried one last time, his words frantic. Margaret, you do not understand what you have done. Robert's dealings involve dangerous people. You have painted a target on your back. Agent Martinez paused mid-sentence. Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? I am warning her, he snapped. You do not know what kind of men Robert worked with. Then you just added witness intimidation to your charges, she replied. As they were let out, I felt something inside me settle, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. For the first time since Robert's death, I was not reacting. I was choosing. Later, Agent Martinez sat across from me again, her file thick with evidence. Your husband was laundering money, yes, she said. But he was not just a criminal. He was also our informant. For over a decade, he worked with the FBI, feeding us information on the very networks he appeared to protect. The money he kept was sanctioned, part of his cover. Margaret, the inheritance is yours, legally and without question. The world tilted once more, but this time it was not despair, it was clarity. Robert had been more complicated than I ever imagined, but he had not abandoned me. Even in secrecy, he had protected me. Victoria and Kevin had believed they were playing chess, but Robert and I had been playing a different game altogether. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of a house that finally felt like mine. The morning sunlight spilled through windows I had chosen myself, illuminating countertops I had selected without anyone else's approval. The coffee pot hissed quietly as if acknowledging the rhythm of a new life. For 43 years, this house had reflected Robert's preferences, his order, his decisions. Now it reflected me. I poured 2 cups of coffee, because mornings were no longer lonely. Across the table sat Sarah Chen, the younger sister of Carol, who had first uncovered Robert's hidden dealings. Sarah was my new financial advisor, and unlike Kevin or Victoria, she spoke to me with respect. "The foundation is thriving," she said, flipping through a binder of reports. "The scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients. Your investments are performing well above expectations." The Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection was more than a project. It was my rebirth. 15 million of my inheritance had been set aside to fight for seniors betrayed by their families, to provide legal aid and advocacy where silence once prevailed. What had begun as my personal nightmare had grown into a mission larger than me. Netflix confirmed the production deal. Sarah continued, "The documentary will start filming next month." I nodded, though a part of me still marveled at how quickly the world had shifted. A widow left with 2 suitcases in a budget motel was now the subject of a televised crime story. Reporters called it the mother's revenge, but to me, it was simply survival made visible. Not everything had transformed so neatly. Letters arrived from Victoria every month, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes pretending at remorse. At first I read them, curious to see whether my daughter had finally faced herself. But her words were always poisoned with justification, so I stopped opening them. She remained in federal prison, serving her sentence alongside Kevin, and that was where she belonged. Sarah glanced at me carefully. Her lawyer says she wants to meet, to apologize, perhaps to ask for forgiveness. I stirred sugar into my coffee, watching the grains vanish. Forgiveness is not a gift to be demanded. It is earned. She has not earned it. Sarah pressed gently. "People can change, Margaret." I thought of the motel room, of Victoria's cold eyes as she said I was useless, of her voice dripping with entitlement as she waved documents she had forged. Perhaps. But if she changes, it will not be for me. It will be for herself. And I do not owe her reconciliation. The conversation shifted to my grandchildren. Victoria had requested supervised visits, claiming they deserved to know their grandmother. The irony was cruel. When she forced me out of my house, had she considered the children? When she risked prison for wealth, had she thought of their future? "My relationship with them will begin when they are adults," I said. "When they can decide for themselves. They will know the truth, and they will judge her actions, not my silence." The doorbell rang. I signed for a delivery.
Good morning, everyone.
A new
I have
easel
the
for the
latest
art
updates
studio
for you.
I had created in what was once Robert's den. Painting had become my quiet rebellion, a return to the dream I had abandoned when marriage demanded all of me. Each brushstroke was a declaration of self, each canvas a reminder that it was never too late to begin again. That evening, as the house settled into its nighttime silence, I walked through each room with deliberate steps. The kitchen gleamed with new fixtures. The study had been reborn as an airy studio filled with color and light. Even the bedroom carried my imprint now, no longer a shrine to the past, but a sanctuary for my future. I paused at the easel where my latest painting stood. It was a self-portrait, though not in the traditional sense.
We did it.
A woman stood in sunlight, her shoulders squared, her eyes unflinching. She did not look like the grieving widow who had packed her life into suitcases half a year ago. She looked like someone who had taken every betrayal, every insult, every dismissal, and transformed it into power. Sometimes I wondered if Victoria understood what she had created. By discarding me, she had forced me to see myself. By betraying me, she had given me freedom. Her cruelty had forged my independence. Sarah once asked if I regretted the family estrangement, the trials, the relentless media attention. I told her the truth. 6 months ago, I had nothing. Now I had purpose. I had a voice louder than silence. I had turned their attempt to bury me into my resurrection. Family, I realized, was not defined by blood. Family was defined by loyalty, by protection, by love untainted by greed. Victoria and Kevin were my DNA, yes, but not my family. Harrison, Carol, Sarah, even Detective Rodriguez, they had shown me what family truly meant. As I stood by the window, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. My story was not over. It was evolving, branching into new chapters I had never dared to imagine. Tomorrow I would continue building a foundation that would protect others. Tomorrow I would wake in a house that reflected me. Tomorrow I would choose myself again, and again, and again. Victoria once told me I was useless, that I should find somewhere else to die. But standing there in the fading light, I knew the truth. The best revenge was not destruction. It was creation. It was becoming everything your enemies never believed you could be. I was Margaret Sullivan, and I was just beginning. There comes a moment in every life when silence is no longer survival but surrender. For years I believed that keeping peace, keeping order, keeping quiet was the price of love. I gave everything I had to a marriage, to a daughter, to a life that was built on sacrifice. And when betrayal came, when my own child cast me aside, I thought I had lost it all. But I was wrong. What I lost was not myself. What I lost was the illusion that I was powerless. I walked out of that motel with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. I walked into a lawyer's office expecting despair and found fire instead. The truth did not just save, might remade me. Every lie, every forged document, every cruel word became the kindling for a transformation I never thought possible. Victoria and Kevin believed they had orchestrated my downfall. They thought I would crumble under shame and poverty. Instead, their greed uncovered a strength buried beneath decades of obedience. Their betrayal forced me to see the woman I had always been, but had never allowed myself to become. Now I live in a home that finally reflects me. I wake to mornings of my own choosing. I spend my days building a foundation that protects others from the kind of cruelty I endured. My story has become a warning, a lesson, and for some, a lifeline. And I am no longer invisible. Do I grieve the daughter I once knew? Yes. Do I mourn the years I gave to people who believed my worth was measured only in service? Yes. But grief is no longer my identity. It is simply the soil from which my new life has grown. If you are listening, if you have ever been told you are useless, if you have ever been made to feel small by the people who should have protected you, know this. Your silence is not your destiny. You can stand. You can fight. You can take back what is yours, whether it is your dignity, your home, or your very name. Because the greatest revenge is not in seeing your enemies fall. It is in rising higher than they ever imagined you could. This is my story, and it is only the beginning. Do not forget to subscribe to Silent Lies because there are more stories like mine waiting to be told. Stories that will shock you, move you, and remind you that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back into the light.